everybody good? Can you still hear me? Can you hear me clearly? Just want to make sure of that. We'll get the indication. Do a thumbs up or something, please.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Right. The last thing I think all of us want on a Thursday morning, right about 11 o'clock, is continued lecture on how consumers behave and how we are trying to do almost the impossible, and that's to understand how consumers' minds work and why they do make decisions the way they do. We all know that there's no secret recipe to that. It's almost like the KFC 11 herbs and spices secret recipe that has remained a secret over many years, although there have been a few attempts to copy it. But yes, unfortunately, this is what it is. We are busy with our final chapter in this particular module, which leaves us with a lot of time to actually do proper revision and give feedback on previous assessments that's been done, assignments, and formal tests. And we'll get to that in a week or so, but at the moment, I think to continue where we left off on Tuesday, we were just about to start, or as a matter of fact, we have started the 5 steps, or addressing the 5 steps in the decision-making process of a consumer by dealing with each of them individually. Just to recap, the 5 steps are to identify the problem, to obviously gather information about your alternatives, to then sit down and evaluate your alternatives. In step 4, the options that you have decided on to measure that against the criteria that you've set for yourself for a particular transaction, then make a decision to buy it, and then the final step would be to see, how did we do afterwards? Did we experience what we expected? Was it better? Was it worse? That's basically the 5 steps in the decision-making process. Some of it, as we'll see along the way, as the more repetitive, the more habitual your decisions are, or it necessitates not to go through all these steps, to skip a few of these steps because you are a repeat buyer, and therefore you're not going to start searching right from scratch and look at all the different alternatives and evaluate them, because you are just going through the motions, following the usual routine, and ending up buying the same product. You don't have to think about it because you have the memory of previous experiences, which is hopefully, if markets have done their job properly, positioned correctly in the mind of the consumer in relation to the competitors and what they have to offer. We dealt with the first one. The first one is pretty much simple as that. Look at the guy at the bottom of the screen. He's got a car, his engine is just blown. He needs a new car. That's his problem. That's his problem that you need to fix. Does he need a new car? I think if that's your only means of transport, yes. So again, in this particular case, the urgency of the problem is quite high. There will be a great deal of involvement from the consumer side because it's an expensive item to replace. But again, it's the circumstances demand it to be addressed immediately. If we progress through the slides, we've done this already previously. We've done this already previously, but the next step after we've identified, or let maybe just summarize the different types of resources that you can use, or that is usually used by consumers to gather the information about how to solve the problem, how to satisfy the need that they have. And I think we also have already early in the chapter concluded that satisfying a need is like similar to the process of solving a problem. As soon as the consumer now recognizes that, right, we have a problem, our engine is blown, they begin to search the search process to find as much information as they can. They will do it cognitively, and that will result in acting on the information that they have to make a decision. In the case of our friend who needs to replace his vehicle, it's going to be a rather quick decision because of the emergency. It will both be mental and physical activities that's involved in this, because in our interactive learning process, when the consumer learns about the different options that's available, brands and products, and the different prices and the different outlets where you can find them. Information search also is internal, external, where the internal search for information refer to specifically what you have in your memory and now retrieving it from your memory. What you've stored in your memory is based on the previous learning that you have experienced. If you've bought a vehicle before, you've had a similar situation before, that would be stored in your memory, and that's what you're going to use as part of your informational gathering process by retrieving information from previous experiences, which is an internal process, and then there will be external options as well. External options will be to go to websites like Auto Trader or Cars24 or whatever they are called nowadays, to ensure that you make or have all the information available to make a decision. Figure 12.3 in your textbooks have just illustrated the information search process that we are dealing with at the moment. Individually, we know that there are things like your own attitude and personality, your lifestyle. You're not all of a sudden saying, oh, thank goodness I get rid of this Hyundai i10. I can now buy myself a Maserati. No, that's not going to happen. It needs to fit into your lifestyle. Your motivation in this case is I need transport to get to work. So these are all individual internal part of the internal search process, where your external or environmental influences is very often depending on, okay, right, this gives me an opportunity to now buy a vehicle that will make me fit into a particular group, a reference group that I want to. Furthermore, you also have, as part of your environmental influences, is the impact that businesses who are advertising and whose adverts now pop up in your mind. You never have a problem with something until you actually told you have a problem. Many years ago, Steve Jobs started a business that is now currently the most recognizable brand in the world. It's also the most valued brand in the world. I think the brand value is in excess of $260 billion at the moment. But nobody in the early 90s saw it coming because nobody had to use for a computer. The only reason why they didn't have use for a computer is because they didn't know that something like that could actually be done. And that's where the opportunity was taken in the market by Steve Jobs and Apple, for instance. And similarly, let me just get Frank up, admitted as well. If my mouse, hello, where's my mouse? Thank you very much. Thanks, Franco. Thanks for joining. I think businesses make you aware of something very often that you don't know that you need because you just never had a use for it or never had a need for it. And that's part of that adds, in this particular case, this adds to the trouble because all of a sudden because maybe last night, before the incident this morning, when your car broke down and you were in the image in page in the first step of the consumer decision making process, you saw an ad about a car. I thought, oh, well, that's quite good. That's a nice offer. Because it's fresh in your memory, and because you have now experienced that problem, or that problem has now been created, which didn't exist the time that you saw it last night. You're going to act on that, because that's what marketers attempt to do. There's always three things that marketers attempt to do with their communication. They want to inform you. They want to inform you of what's available. They want to inform you of what new products that maybe becomes available. They attempt to persuade you to rather buy their products than the competitor's product, and they also need to remind you that while we're still here, remember us, don't forget about us, but also we have a new product. We have a new product available as well. So it's not, your communication is not directed solely to new customers. It's also directed at existing consumers. Right. Once you have taken all of that into consideration, you will evaluate all the options, and hopefully you'll make the right decision. Now, to what extent, to rephrase, to what extent the consumer is involved in the decision-making process will depend on a few things. Your level of involvement is important. The extent to which a consumer feels that a product or a brand will lead to results that they want or value is definitely part of the equation, as well as the consumer's involvement in what motivates them. At this point, what motivates me or that person in the scenario is to get a vehicle as soon as possible. They need a vehicle. It's not a question of satisfying a desire. It's a question of satisfying an emergency need at this point. Because it's an expensive exercise. You're buying a car. You're not just buying a loaf of bread or a liter of milk. It is going to be a extended process, because if the product is important to the self-identity of a consumer, it will take a bit longer for them to reach a final decision, because they will take all the features and all the benefits that the product offer into consideration before making a final decision. Where there's a low involvement purchase, where, in other words, the consumer does not consider the product to be sufficiently important to their belief system, you know what? It becomes a routine decision and a routine purchase. But the high involvement decision suggests that the consumer thinks very carefully about the process of how they obtain information and from which sources they obtain information. There are two issues that come to mind, and that is the perceived risk. In other words, the amount of risk that the consumer perceives that they can experience if they make the wrong decision. So there's an uncertainty about the outcome, and that equates to the risk or the perceived risk. And in addition to that, also the potential consequences. In other words, do I stand to lose a lot of money if I make the wrong decision? And for that reason, I postpone making the final decision by gathering more information before I make my decision? Or is the decision based on our sociable desires, that we want to buy a vehicle, in this case, that will make us look cool, and our friends will compliment on how cool we look in our new car? You know what? At the end of the day, it comes down to what you can afford, what purpose you need to use the vehicle for. And I know that we if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we want to be acknowledged. We want to be, we want to feel that we belong somewhere, and for that reason, we often make social or belonging influence decisions when we purchase specific items. I'm not going to necessarily increase my social standing if I now change from Bacoma bread to Albany bread, for instance. If I change, however, from a Hyundai i20 to a Golf GTI, it tells a different story. So both types of involvement lead to higher levels of information processing. If we perceive it to be a risky decision because we stand to lose a lot, we are going to be seeking more information from as wide as possible a range of sources. If we feel that it's going to impact on our social standing or social status, we will also be gathering a wider range of information from a wider range of sources. The image on the screen basically just represents the three distinct types of consumer decision making that we have recognized up to this point. The low, the high, and where there's limited decision making. The more important it is, the higher the risk it is, the bigger transaction it is, the more we stand to lose because it's more risky, the higher our involvement would be, and exactly the reverse on the left-hand side of the image. Lower involvement, more sort of habitual decisions because we don't stand to lose a lot. It's not a risky one. It's not an expensive exercise. What is habitual? I've mentioned it a number of times during the session so far. Habitual decision making is when the consumer satisfaction of a product, or that the satisfaction they receive from buying a specific product or using a certain service is not necessarily going to or is going to specifically lead to a repeat buying transaction up to the point where it later on just becomes routinized and becomes part of our daily activities. We know, and we discussed it in Tuesday session. It's usually when it's a non-durable product. In other words, something that if it runs out, your batteries, you need to replace your battery so you can operate your wireless keyboard or your mouse. It's something that you need. You know that it has a restricted life, and when it dies, you replace it. When your toothpaste runs out, you replace it. When there's no more milk in the fridge, you replace it. Those are all habitual decisions that becomes, because of the repetitiveness, becomes almost a habit for us. Very often, if not in all of the cases, habitual decision making or buying behavior is based on our experience. We are not going to repeatedly buying a specific product if we were unsatisfied. If we have a good experience with a particular product, the chances that we'll repeatedly go back and buy that same product when it runs out, especially in the case of a non-durable product, is very, very high. Habitual decision making can also, or usually, exist when there is a low involvement from the consumer, but it can also be categorized in either brand loyalty or repeat buying, where brand loyalty refers to an emotional attachment that you have with a particular brand, and that's why you go back to it, and that's why you repeat supporting a particular brand. I know, for instance, I'm not like that. I'm not necessarily brand loyal. I'm more sort of, okay, what's functional and what do I need, and what's the purpose for me buying this particular item. If you're buying a vehicle, your first car way back was a VW, the chances that you will stay with that because of the emotional attachment is quite high. Maybe your second vehicle will also be a VW because you're used to it. There's no guarantee, however, that it will remain, that you will remain with that particular brand, but there is very often emotional attachment, and as a result of that, we've become our decisions in which brands we are going to consider, and usually or most likely are going to stay with, is based on the emotional attachment that we have with that brand, based on previous experience. Repeat buying refers to the pattern of a brand or of a brand choice over a period of time. You are used to a particular, you have a, it's pretty much depends on your personal choice. For some other reason, and for many years, whenever the Springboks played rugby or played a test match, I didn't apply this particular rule or personal rule to any football games or any sporting events. But when South Africa rugby plays against or plays a test match, I must have as snacks, because I've convinced myself that I must have um, the chutney flavored knickknacks with me. Maybe because it's golden and it's golden green or yellow and green colors, representing the team or that I support, and maybe it's because I had them on an occasion where we beat the All Blacks for the first time in how many years, and now I stay with it. It becomes a pattern, and I start believing in it. There's no emotional attachment to it, but the fact is that, you know what, it worked the previous time. Let's not jinx it. In my case, that was that. I still do it. Can't wait for the next test match, because that's the next time I'll be able to buy some chutney flavored knickknacks. But anyway, I think you understand that there is a pattern involved, and that we sometimes, because we become familiar with a particular brand, we repeatedly support it, because we know what we're going to get, especially if there's no real distinctive differences between product A and product B and product C. They're all snacks, and they're all salty snacks. Yeah, you know what? So it just depends on what mood I'm in today, but I'm still going to buy that. But there's always a go-to. This is almost your default setting when you have to make that final decision. Limited decision making, as opposed to what we have addressed so far, is where there is no, it's very similar to habitual. There's no real alternative available. What else can be used for the purpose that toilet paper is used? Tell you what, if you've done your national service in South Africa and you're stuck you're stuck in the bush somewhere, then you become very creative with alternatives that become available. But usually for commercial purposes, there's no real alternative that you use. So therefore, because of that, you don't spend that much time in having to. Nobody's going to really convince you that this particular piece of bog roll is better than the other. Well, it's toilet paper. Surely, I mean, and the purpose that you use it for is exactly the same. So, how much better can one be than the other? Extended decision making refers to specifically high-level buying involvement because of the nature of the product that you can buy. It's mostly expensive, durable items like houses and properties, houses and PCs and cars, for instance. And your information search internally and externally is going to be extended as well. That's why it's called an extended decision making, or is referred to as extended decision making. An extended buying decision is when there's durable products, when it's expensive and extremely important to you, when customers feel that they lack the necessary experience and information to make a decision, especially when they're buying a durable or expensive product. They experience a lot of doubt, and therefore, to address this, they rather spend more time to find more information before they make their final decision. At this point, we've reached this point now that we have, through internal and external resources and search processes, we have gathered, hopefully, enough information. We have been able to now draft ourselves a short list of options that we are considering. And part of the evaluation process is to also set some criteria, evaluative criteria. We need to compare the different options that we have on our short list of options available to certain criteria that will help us to make our final decision. Obviously, what we can afford, our budget, our financial situation is an important component, but let's look at all the other options as well. A consumer will buy a product which matches their personality, without a doubt. But the four classifications of consumers is that we have consumers who take an economical approach. They would always look at the price, and that probably remains the most important attribute for them to consider. They want to make sure that if they have X amount to spend, that it's going to be the most economical decision to satisfy a variety of needs and not just a particular need. So they are always going to be rational decision makers. You've got your passive consumer as well. Passive consumer has something in mind that they want to buy, but if there's a salesperson that approaches them and expose them to new alternatives, they are very flexible and can easily be manipulated by providing them with additional information. Then you have your emotional consumers. Emotional consumers, it's 50% off. Well, buy it because it's 50% off. They often make irrational and very personal decisions. And then you've got your cognitive consumer who is extremely careful, doesn't make a decision until they have not considered all the various sources and options that is available. They usually want to take much longer because of the careful nature, to make a final decision. We've set criteria for ourselves. We know what our type of consumers are. We know what our personalities are. And now we get to the point where we have to make a decision to buy. Once you've evaluated all the options, it becomes the next logical or natural step to take in your decision-making process. Which one is the right one? The quality of the decision depends on the suitability as well as the adequacy of your information. Suitability refers to the right or appropriate information for a particular person or situation, where the adequacy refers to the satisfactory or acceptable acceptability of the quality of your information that you receive. We finally decided to buy something. Then we bought something. Now we need to find out if we're happy with it or not, to conclude the whole process. The final step is therefore referred to as your post-buying reaction or response. We reach this point where we now have to decide, or sometimes our decision is made for us, depending on, again, the nature of the product that you have purchased. You will immediately be satisfied with a product that you have bought for the purpose of instant gratification. You're hungry, you're thirsty. Did it satisfy your need? Yes, no. Very often, products that you have purchased are only judged later on. You're not going to, after one day of driving your new car, say, oh, shucks, I've made the wrong decision. You are going to give it some time, and maybe you grow into it and maybe you become used to it. And also because you can't just return it. You can't just buy another burger or another Coke, in this case another car, to replace it if you're not happy with your car after on the first day that you've bought and used it. You can experience post-buying satisfaction. Obviously, that's just happy faces, very positive. If you have 3 faces, emojis to select from, that will be the guy in green with a big smile on, as opposed to the one on the other end of the scale, which is the very, very, very dissatisfied, red, angry face. This is where the situation that you've experienced from the transaction has resulted into a satisfactory experience, and therefore you're experiencing a very positive reaction to what you've the purchase that you have made. In other words, what you've expected is actually what you got, which means that you will buy it again. And then hopefully, if that repeats itself over a period of time, it will result in brand loyalty. We also can have post-buying dissatisfaction. Quite clearly from the image at the bottom of the screen, not happy with whatever service or product that person bought. It's very irate, it's completely negative. It's very often expressed verbally, like in the image, but it can also be how we react to it. Our behavioral response, our actions, can be verbalized as well. We can throw our toys in the restaurant and say we're not happy with the experience, it's never coming back, and you're making all kinds of claims and accusations and promises of not returning. Or you can just keep quiet and never return. I'm not sure which of these options are necessarily correct, because I think it's maybe a combination of both, very much determined by your personality of a particular consumer. But if I take myself personally, if I had a bad experience, again, depending on what I lost, 200, 300, 400 rand for a meal, compared to losing a 40,000 rand mountain bike, for instance, which was damaged when it was delivered to me, or which broke the first time I rode it. The different situations obviously will result in different reactions. I'll probably be more or less verbal in a situation where, okay, it was a bad meal, it was a bad experience, things happen, okay, I've got the choice of not coming back, so that's it. I'll pay for the bill, but I'm probably not going to return because I'm very unhappy with my experience. I buy a new bike, cost me 40, 50K. Immediately on day one, first race, it breaks down. I take it back, they replace it, it breaks down again 2 days later. The actions I'm going to take there is going to probably be more verbal, because I want to make sure that the message gets across effectively that I am dissatisfied. Not just am I not going to never use you again as a service provider or never buy your products again, I'm also going to tell the rest of the world of my experience, and that they should also follow my actions and not support a particular brand or product. We've got a neutral situation as well, where there's still, it's literally the vote is still out. Are we actually we're not really dissatisfied, but we're not entirely satisfied with our experience that we've had. It was not as good. It's often, if you go back to a particular service provider that you've used before, and the service is not exactly the same, or the experience is not exactly the same as you had the first with your first or your previous visit, and as a result of that, you are not judging them yet. You are just comparing it to your previous experience. It wasn't as satisfying as the previous one, but it's also not at that point where you're completely unhappy with it, and you immediately make a decision to change to a different supply, to a different service provider, for instance. So it's a very neutral situation. You're not 100% sure if you need to change, if you want to change, if it's worth the effort, or maybe if the service provider on a particular day, it was just their off day. Things happen. I mean, we don't all have the same experiences in similar situations every single time, or the same outcomes. We can also have a post-buying conflict, where you as the consumer is totally uncertain whether you have made the right decision. It's also referred to and often called the post-buying dissonance, where customers are trying to reduce the fact that they are in conflict if they've made the right decision, by finding information that can sort of support their argument, or finding contradictory information to prove their argument. Usually, the response when you're trying to justify, you know what, maybe I've made the bad decision, but I'm not sure. You're going to find a reason to justify it. But then you're also going to you also, in the same process, are trying to find information to prove exactly the two. That's where your super ego and your ID is in conflict in your personality, and it results in a situation where there's a conflict between the two components of your personality, and the response is uncertainty with the consumer as to have they made the right decision or not. What are the marketing implications of these steps that consumers take? If you want to understand the consumer and analyze the consumer, which was the intention at the start of the chapter, by looking at the different steps that they take in the decision-making process, It will allow you to take an advantage of certain market opportunities as a marketer, because you can intervene at any point. The first action and the first step is a need arises because a problem is identified. That need needs to be satisfied. That problem needs to be fixed. Now, where most the steps where marketers are most influential is step number 2, where they are gathering information. That's where you're pitching yourself, because you can intervene at that point by providing the correct information at the appropriate time that is required and needed by a consumer who's making a decision. It will, excuse me, I'm still on some meds as well because yeah, I've been to the doctor on Tuesday. I have flu, and I know that I don't have COVID. That's the best part of it as well. But yeah, the last 2 days have not been great. I'm on a lot of medication, and that you usually have when you have the flu, and it doesn't always react well to our systems. However, back to what we were busy discussing. Marketers, as I said, can take advantage of these opportunities by intervening at the right stage or step in the consumer's decision-making process. They can also specifically target specific markets and have a properly designed marketing strategy to ensure that they provide that customer with the right information at the time that they need it. It will help the business to segment their markets better and more effectively, allocate the resources that they have better and more effectively. It will help to position the brand or product better in the mind of the consumer. And it hopefully will provide them with a better know-how on how to influence the customer's decision-making. When we analyze the internal thought process of a consumer, and we've determined throughout this module that it's not that easy. It basically results in two discoveries, and that is that the criteria that consumers use in their buying decision and the variables that influence those decisions are the ones that are most important and most influenceable by marketers. If we can provide a customer, like Apple have done right from the start with the entire product range, by satisfying a consumer need that the consumer didn't know they had, it results in a business of the magnitude of Apple computers. The criteria that consumers use when they're making their buying decision is going to be influenced by primarily their ability to afford such a transaction or not. Regardless of how wonderful the features and benefits are that the product offers them, the affordability remains the most important criteria that most people use in step number 3 when they are evaluating the different options and they are drafting that short list of options that they are finally going to make a decision from in step number 4. When they finally engage in making a transaction, taking a decision, buying a product, or not. And the 5 steps in the decision-making process doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to always reach a conclusion and make a decision. If your options that you have or that you are considering is not meeting the criteria that you've set for yourself, maybe affordability, maybe value for money, regardless of what your criteria is. If it doesn't meet the criteria, you're not going to make a decision. You are going to return maybe to step number 2 again and gather more information that will help you to make a decision. But you will not progress through the steps in the decision-making process to the next step if the previous step have not been satisfied. The problem is not going to go away. We all know that step number 1, let us identify a problem that we have and the need that needs to be satisfied, is not going to go away. The fact that if we are hungry, you will remain hungry if you have not reached the point where you've made a decision, step number 4, to buy something to satisfy your hunger. If you reach step number 4 and you are still not 100% sure what to buy, or you can't buy it because you don't have the money to do it, the hunger is not going to go away. At some point, you will make a decision. Maybe you go, or maybe you definitely will go back to step number 2, gather more information. Okay, look at alternatives. Okay, right, maybe we shouldn't have considered this. Okay, right. So what fits into my budget? And then you will add new alternatives that you will evaluate in step number 3 again, and then it's like, all right, this fits into my budget, and that's my decision I'm going to take, which then obviously result in step number 4. Step number 4 always results in step number 5, because you will always evaluate if you are satisfied or not. What you see on the slide basically represents the benefits that marketers will experience and businesses will experience if they understand the decision-making process and where to get involved in the decision-making process. Because you, as a marketer representing the company that that offers the products that can satisfy a customer's need and resolve that problem that they've identified, can manipulate the decision-making process through the message that you convey in your marketing communication. It can also result in you attracting new customers, and it can result in, as a result, obviously, an increase in the revenue and market share for the business. And then hopefully, if you use the information available to you effectively, you can predict how consumers are going to behave in future more accurately, which we know because we do not have crystal balls, because we are not gypsies, is often a very difficult process to do. When we assess the consumer's involvement in the decision-making process and the level at which they make their decisions, for marketers, it helps us to supply the customer with the right kind of information so they do not end up like that person in the image where there's a complete information overload, and at the end of the day, they don't make a decision because there's almost too much information that they are confronted with. Some people avoid making a decision often because they have not got enough information, but very often people also avoid making a final decision because it's just too much information to process. Finding the right balance. in offering the right information, the right amount of information, and at the right time is what makes a communication or marketing communication successful. As I've said previously, you can get the right information to the right people at the wrong time. You can get the wrong information to the right people. And in neither of these two scenarios, you are going to have a positive outcome that results in a transaction, because that's what you as marketers are after. Marketing communication, as I've said during the today's session, is an attempt to inform customers not just about the availability and the price of the product, also the benefits and the features, and where they can find them. It's also an attempt to persuade them to rather by specifically stressing certain features and benefits of the product, persuading the customer in the process to buy your product and not a product of your competitors. But it's also needs to act as a reminder that your company is still fine, that the consumer can be reassured that the brand will continue to deliver the quality of product that you as a customer have been used to, because all our marketing communication efforts are not just directed at new customers, but also at existing customers. We just need reassurance that they are supporting the right brand and they are going to get the quality that they expect consistently. I think we've reached the end of today's session. Actually, yeah, we actually have reached the end of today's session. And as the image expresses, you're more than welcome to ask any questions if you have any. Any questions, anybody? A message in the chat box. Everybody's still good? No questions?
All good, sir.
Thank you very much. If we're all good, then this is it for week number 13 on this module. Take care of yourselves, and we can chat again next week. I hope you have a very nice weekend. Stay safe. Social distance. Sanitize. Keep your mask on. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you.